So I want to address a hippo-sized question in the room, which relates to SMRs, which is small modular reactors. That means nuclear power plants that are just a miniature version of the traditional one. Now, we participated in one of these tenders last year in Finland with a consortium of a couple of companies that would supply a how do you call that, turnkey SMR with a predetermined amount of power that would then be supplied with a long-term offtake agreement with the actual customer. The process took like 6 months. It was the largest power consumer in Finland. And at the end of it, when we had to release the numbers, it was my impression that our bid was the most price competitive of all the bids that were made. But the unfortunate part of it is that it was still twice the price of power in the country last year. So that essentially means that there are certain geographic regions, such as Northern Europe, where the power is the cheapest throughout the whole continent. That includes Finland, Sweden, Norway, especially in the north, where Norway and Sweden, they have a lot of hydro. Finland has got plenty of nuclear. Wind has been the big kind of the investment case in the last 20 years. So like the power generation is like 94% non-fossil. As well as the cheap price level. So regardless of the very large industrial complexes that you can find in both Finland and Sweden that consume a lot, on a per capita basis compared to a lot of other countries, the power supply is so sustainable. I mean renewable or nuclear, that it doesn't make sense to build more baseload capacity in terms of SMRs. Now, with the lessons of this case that we did with this group of companies, it became obvious that as long as we're dealing with light water reactors, the traditional nuclear technology, there's a limit to how cheaply can you produce electricity with that, meaning capex, opex. And if there's a limited amount of let's say, efficiency gains to be had from the traditional technology, then the other option for us is to look at a different region in Europe. And in this case, I would really put it to Southern Europe and the Balkans. Southern Europe, because it's predominantly relying on fossil, and I'm talking about places like Spain, Italy, Greece, that have moved away from coal and oil, but they're heavily reliant on natural gas, and all of that is imported, essentially. Now, the public opinion in places like Italy and Greece is against nuclear because of Fukushima, Chernobyl, all of that, and also there's the tectonic issues, which means that when you have a high probability of earthquakes, then that does provide an additional level of risk in those regions. But then the interesting part is the countries in the Balkans, especially the aspiring EU member countries, because they are relatively poor. They are heavily relying on both coal and natural gas. And the countries are reasonably small, which means they have limited amount of resources, but they all have to make a roadmap in order to get the EU membership in due course, which is most likely going to happen after the turn of the next decade, so the early 2030s. And when they need to provide that roadmap, how do they get rid of their dependence on coal and natural gas? Well, essentially, a lot of those areas in the Balkans are pretty good for solar. But then solar is intermittent. So what happens at night? Then the option really is to have more base load to balance out the intermittency of solar and wind, So they have the option of either going for SMRs, nuclear, or batteries. And if you want to look at even smaller nation states, the amount of batteries that you would have to have in order to provide, a sustainable 24/7 supply of electricity is literally crazy. So under current technological, let's say, limitations, I don't think batteries are going to be the answer. So moving away from coal and natural gas, yes, solar and wind can play a role, but you need to have a base load as well. And because power prices there are, you would say, in the three digits, like over 100 euros per megawatt hour. Like in Sweden, Finland, Norway, you're looking at, 40, 45 euros a megawatt hour. So it's 2.5, 3 times more expensive power in that region. Meaning that we could, even with the current technologies available in SMRs, we could essentially build and make it a profitable venture without subsidies per se. But of course, then unless you have an offtake agreement, because when you go in and you have a fixed capex and an opex, quite well, but and then you have a very variable offtake market. So unless you can have some certainty on that front, I'm not sure investors are going to go for that. But this is an angle that we're looking into right now. Is it going to work? Time will tell. But with the time spent on learning about SMRs and looking into the details in Finland and Sweden, it would kind of be a shame to put that to waste and not try to replicate that in let's say, in an area where all of this understanding could be put into use. Not to mention, smaller Balkan countries, if you can put in, multiple billions of investments into clean energy, that's going to be a game changer, absolutely a game changer. What other opportunities is that going to provide? Obviously one of the clear ones is data centers that are power hungry, and data centers, they really want to have non-fossil power. So if you put in and try to get some economies of scale, you put in enough solar and nuclear, and that would attract investments into data centers as well, which long term is probably a good idea for nation states to have data centers and have access and control of those within the borders of their countries. So I think that in and of itself is probably a good idea. In Finland and Sweden, where the power prices are cheap because of the abundance of clean electricity, there is a let's say a wave of data center investments announced and in the pipeline. So if at least even half or a third of those plans materialize, that's going to double the amount of power consumption in kind of both countries, which means that when supply is not increasing as fast as the demand, then prices will go up. So then essentially maybe 5-10 years down the line, investments into SMRs, especially once we can move on from the light water reactors to molten salt, that's probably going to reduce capex. It's going to reduce a lot of other issues, radiation, all of that. And especially, I would say, once China starts to mass produce SMR reactors, then the prices are going to collapse. We all saw what happened with wind and solar. When China starts to mass produce, the prices drop per unit. And then, nobody can really compete with China because of that production capacity. Is it a political risk to buy Chinese SMRs, especially, molten salt? You could argue that, but if you can get it from China, like with a 40%, 50% discount compared to the West, money talks. So I think once China starts to do that, we will have a revolution in terms of power generation, especially on the baseload side of it, in the 2030s. And I kind of got into all of that by accident, but luck favors the brave. So you have to try 10 different things, and as an entrepreneur that probably 8 or 9 of the things that you try are not going to work out. But it is what it is, and you're never remembered of your failures, but you always get remembered of your successes. And the more you kind of try different angles, sooner or later something's gonna provide an opportunity to go for it. But anyways, that was a couple of thoughts on the SMR side of it. But anyways, if you have some thoughts, do share them, and yeah, let's see what happens.